Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors, experts in the biggest questions in tech. This is Making Revenue Tick.
Hello and welcome to Making Revenue Tick. I am joined by our currently #1 ranked podcast guest of all time, Jacob Warwick. Jacob, how you doing?
I'm doing great. And I'm just happy to know that I'm a little bit ahead of Scott Leese right now for the first time in my career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it might. This one's going to beat it, Jacob, because this topic.
Well, here's the goal.
This is
You're
the
going to send
goal.
it to Scott, and Scott's going to make sure his beats all of us. That's what's going to happen.
The battle is on. So
Yeah.
This topic, what we're going to talk about today. So obviously you came onto our main podcast, What Makes You Tick, and you talked about so many different things. You got quite practical around the things that you're doing from an executive coaching perspective, particularly around how to position themselves in a job search. And I know we were just talking in the green room before we came on, but I've written an executive job search playbook, and that was back in November of last year. And 5 executives a week DM me on LinkedIn and say, "Hey, someone send me your playbook," or "I watched the Pavilion on the Bench session. Can we talk about it?" So I think this is such a big topic that very few people have an answer for. I think the amount of conflicting advice that's available to executives around what to go and do first, everyone updates their resume first.
Yeah, actually, LinkedIn too. Chelsea did a post. Our chief revenue officer did a post about how we launched in beta a free LinkedIn profile review, and which is available at freelinkedinreview.com. Funny enough, and we get 100 requests an hour right now. And so we've broken Zapier, and we've broken Make, and we've broken Anthropic and Gemini, and they're all freaking out. We've had some great conversations with some folks that need some support.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let's do our best in this episode to talk about let's get really clear on the problem. Let's talk about the problem that people are coming to us with, how we see it from our perspectives. Obviously, my perspective as a recruiter, your perspective as a world-class coach, negotiation expert, and all of the above. And in fact, you've got these now tools and systems and resources that can help people. So people can come away from this episode going, right, I finally understand it now. Here's some stuff that I can do that's different from everything else that I'm being told, that's going to position me differently in the market, and ultimately mean that I can have way more conversations with the type of businesses around the type of opportunities that I would love to have. So
yeah, I've got a lot of contrarian thoughts on that for you. So we're gonna shake things up.
I wouldn't possibly imagine any other possible scenario than you having some wonderful contrarian takes, but from lived experience. So Jacob, for people who don't already have the pleasure of knowing you, obviously they should definitely watch your What Makes You Tick episode, but give us just like a sort of elevator view of...
I'm not doing that. I do that for other people, not for myself. The cobbler's children have no shoes. My goal today is to provide as much value as possible, and then everyone else will do their own digging. But essentially, I rose my own career in marketing and realized that I hated it and started applying go-to-market strategies to individuals instead, because watching people grow brought me more fulfillment than watching companies grow. And I mostly built a coaching career out of market demand, not because I said, well, I can't keep a job, I might as well be a coach. So what happened was people said, wow, it seemed like you rose in your career really quickly. What did you do about that? And I didn't know how to answer them. So I studied behavioral psychology, and I studied some of the things, and I started to understand what makes me tick, funny enough, which is why I was so attracted to that podcast in the first place. And then I started helping other people with it. And really the takeaway is that you help people go to market for themselves. And I suspect a lot of your listeners are go to market or revenue and sales leaders. And what if they just thought about their own job search as them being the product, and the networking they did as market research, and the interviews they had and the conversations they scheduled as pipeline, and thinking about it as an enterprise sales deal, because if you want to get paid more than, say, $50,000 a year, it's an enterprise deal. And then realizing that maybe you need to create some champions to support you to get that deal across the line. And then also realizing that all of your sales eggs are in one basket, you're probably going to miss quota. So maybe for yourself and for your career as the product, it would behoove you to build more pipeline, right? So even if we just think about that, just that one little psychological shift for the listeners on this podcast, if you were selling yourself as a product, how would you approach this search differently? And I think that's going to unlock a lot of folks just thinking like that.
It's that aha moment, isn't it? You must get it all the time when you're speaking to executives and leaders, because that's not the way most people teach them to do it. So from your perspective, when you're coaching leaders and executives, what have they been trying before they come to you that's falling flat on its face?
They typically follow what a lion's share of the advice is that's out there. Tweak your resume, tweak your LinkedIn profile, hire an interview coach, practice all your stories, get your elevator pitch down, network, whatever that means. And the thing is, things change once you reach a certain seniority in your career. So in the middle part of your career, you're quite literally trying to be a cog in the wheel of a bigger machine and trying to fit that cog right there and explain that. And you do that with stories. Now, that's where most people are. Most people. So most content that's created is directed at most people. So when you become an executive leader, the content that you actually have access to is very limited. And all you're seeing is this noise that works for other people, but not for yourself. And so when you look at it as a career coach, you're like, well, everyone thinks this way. They must be onto something, right? But it's not catered to you. It's not the same ICP, right? So we often gaslight ourselves by saying, look, all the information out here is this. I'm doing that and it's not working. Therefore, there must be something wrong with me, right? Because it's working for everyone else, right? But objectively, like you're at a different position in your career right now. If you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, you're in the top 1% of the 1% of the world, right? So wouldn't it make sense that 99.9% of advice out there is not for you, right? So we have to think about things differently. And then also, my clients, and I'll say this jokingly and lovingly, have the audacity of calling themselves leaders, but then waiting to follow somebody else's lead when it comes to their job search, right? Let's wait for Rich to tell me this is where I should be as a recruiter. Like as your recruiter perspective, I will yield to your positioning because you're the expert. But I have the audacity to call myself a leader. Right? Shouldn't I be the one to lead the narrative? Right? Shouldn't I be the one to push that forward and to test new things and to try different language with different people, which is like market research, right? How does this resonate with this ICP or this target buyer, right? If the target buyer is looking for middle management and my messaging really works for that, odds are you're going to be aligned to middle management positions, which might not be aligned with what your ambitions are. And so a lot of times we're looking for someone else to take the lead, which means that we're perpetuating the character traits of a follower and not a leader. And we wonder why we don't get the leadership positions. It's pretty fascinating.
I love that. It makes me think of something. One of my favorite podcasts I listened to recently was Dan Priestley on the Chris Do podcast.
Dan is amazing. Chris Do is amazing. Like absolutely phenomenal. Like everything that they do, I want to watch.
Yeah. Well, you got me onto Chris Do. And I listened to that episode and I was like, oh my goodness. It was about like how to create your dream roster of clients. And it's all about moving up market. And all of the stuff that they were talking about was totally applicable to a job search, just like you say, rather than it being an entrepreneur trying to go and build their book of business, you're trying to build a pipeline of wicked people that you can go and talk to, and ultimately create opportunities inside dream accounts. But he talked about in that episode a principle, which I'd love to get your perspective on, which is whenever you meet someone, subconsciously, you're thinking of them in one of three types: newbies, worker bees, or key people of influence.
Yeah.
So newbie, like you're literally just doing it as like a sort of person who's just trying to learn. There's no real value there. Worker bee, you are one of the many, like you've just said. You charge about the same, you're worth about the same. There's not much different. And then a key person of influence has a waiting list of clients, is in demand, is a figure of authority, and is someone that you would absolutely create an opportunity for, even if you didn't have the budget to go and do it, because they're going to be a game changer and a multiplier. What's your perspective on that?
I think that's very accurate, but I also think you need to go through those phases as well and learn through that. And I would say that most of the content is created for the worker bee. And those that are trying to elevate past that, as you know, the definition of insanity is doing more of the same and expecting different results. Why would doing what everyone else is doing, like, why would you anticipate being a leader from that? So you actually have to be a contrarian. When the industry's zigging, you need to zag because people go, what the hell? That was different, right? I wasn't expecting that. And you have to have an opinion and have a backbone and be able to defend that. And when you make mistakes, you need to take ownership of that, have vulnerability towards that, share that, because vulnerability is not what everybody has. People aren't comfortable talking about their failures. But when you are, people are attracted to it because it opens them up to talk about their failures. And psychologically speaking, it helps build shared identity because somewhere deep down, we're all failing at something. And it feels okay to open up to somebody. Tolu and I did quite a bit of that, even on our podcast. And you're inviting that participation and up-leveling the conversation, and people are more attracted to you because of that. And so I think you need to go through the pain and understand what it's like to be a newbie and what it's like to be a worker bee and a key person of influence. And I think very few people leave and break that ceiling to the key person of influence because there's no playbook on how to do it. You quite literally need to break glass. What does that mean? Like, you have to do things differently. You have to be willing to be confrontational and different and push back. And you can be totally wrong if you're comfortable taking ownership of that and saying, look, I learned from this experience. Here's what I know now. And people will admire that. Yeah. And we were talking a little bit in the green room about, how do people stand out? And I jokingly say this all the time, but at least 90% of my job, maybe more, is getting executive leaders comfortable with telling the truth. Like, just being honest. And sometimes I'll say this in a group full of hundreds of people. And I'll say, be a good person and be honest. And the amount of heads that go down to take notes drives me nuts. I'm like, you shouldn't need to take a note to be honest. And the reality is, when I'm honest to a recruiter and I say, hey, Rich, I trust your take on me. I don't have this perfect story to tell yet, but here's how I'm saying it now. What's your take on that? Right? And really what happened is I really don't want to burn bridges, but I think it was a tricky situation. I didn't have alignment there. What's your take on that? The likelihood that you're like, wow, you're not alone, dude. Like, a lot of people have that mistake. I'm just happy that you told me the truth and that you're being a straight shooter. Right? And we're trained so much to sugarcoat reality to make it look like we did all these great things. And there are folks, I work with a lot of folks that have been in a position for 1 year and got fired, right? Or got laid off, or maybe they mutually departed. And their story is, man, we had the best results ever. Like, we hit this and we did that. And even if that were true, and I'm not questioning, I don't question my clients on the honesty of their work. Even if that were true, that story then implores the next question, which is, why aren't you still there if it was so good?
Sure.
No matter what, it's your fault. Because statistically, like, there are more employees that do poor jobs, right? And the employer, the one with the money, tends to be held in higher regard. So you're naturally at a disadvantage when trying to say everything was all great, it just didn't work out, right? You sniff that bullshit out in a heartbeat. So it's much better for you to lean in and say, Rich, I'm both glad that you brought that up and a little frustrated, because if I'm honest with you, I've talked to a lot of folks about this and I don't know the politically correct way to talk about it yet. And, I feel that you're someone that I expect, or I suspect, wants a straight shooter and not a fluffy answer. So I don't have this perfect, so please bear with me. And I've bought myself time to think about it and say, look, like, as I've looked back on it, it wasn't a good fit for some of these reasons. And, originally I felt that the CEO was probably a little more authoritarian than necessary. On one hand, we were saying we wanted autonomy and leadership. And on the other hand, whenever we went to go do things with autonomy, the CEO was afraid to hand away their Legos, right? They didn't necessarily want to lose that control. And I'm not saying I was perfect in that, but what I learned was, and that's where the key piece is. So I'm not sugarcoating. This is how I felt, and I'm not saying it was right. But what I learned from that is, much sooner in the process, I should have brought something up. And I'm not quite sure what that is yet. But I suspect, Rich, you talk to executives all the time. What are some of the things that you've learned from that? What are some of the things you've learned from other executives? Like, how could I have approached that situation differently? And now it's like, I don't know the answer. You probably don't know the answer either. Let's collaborate on this and join hands on helping me tell the story. And you might say, man, this guy's a train wreck. I don't want to work with him. This story is pretty weak. But we're testing the narrative in the market. So build more pipeline, have that conversations with other people that you respect, and that story gets polished and polished and polished. So let's say I talk to Tolu next. I might say, Tolu, I was talking to Rich the other day, and it doesn't seem like he has a good answer for this either. So I'm hoping you do. Right. But here's what we covered. And his take was, you need to be honest with it. You need to take ownership of it and move forward faster, right? Share that growth mindset sooner. What's your take on it? So I'm involving other people in my story vulnerably. I'm not trying to sugarcoat bullshit. It's significantly more impactful. And the part of that that's helpful for someone like you in talent management is that you can then say, look, this company I was bringing to you is actually not a good fit because I saw those signs too. However, I know another CEO that's going to love this, right? So you get to make a better call, right? But we're so focused on, oh my gosh, this is the only opportunity that's ever come my way. I have to win it over. So I have to say whatever's perfect, whatever's going to win Rich over, right? That's my focus. But in doing so, you have no respect for you because I'm not trusting your judgment to make a call on my background without hiding the truth. So I'd rather involve you in the story, get you on my side, understand, collaborate with me, and trust that you're going to make the right call on where you recommend I go work next. And that also changes the perspective of you're no longer seeking validation and being desperate. You're just working on telling the truth and helping find alignment. And one of my sticky note things that I tell people to write down, finding alignment is more important than being impressive. So it's more important for you to ask questions on whether or not you're going to be a good fit than it is to perfect a story 5 years in the past to show how impressive this playbook is that you ran a couple of years ago. So in that regard, interviews are really easy because you're focused on asking questions and consulting and brainstorming, then going, oh, what was that thing I did 7 years ago? Oh, that boss was such a prick. How do I bring that up in a good way? Nope, can't do it. Was definitely a prick. But you're asking me and then you're lost, right? And you've got a monkey on your back and you're just getting your ass kicked in that interview. You're going to fail every time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so funny because people will have emotional baggage around a lot of that stuff. And some people have never been able to talk about that openly, maybe even with their family, right? So they have this kind of victim mentality around it or just unresolved trauma. And so when someone hits them, it triggers them and you see them lose their cool, the poise drops, and then you get this sort of very unfiltered and very unproductive reaction. I guess what I would like to think is, or like to ask you about is, I would imagine some people listening to this podcast are going, well, that sounds great. Well, I'm often talking to a junior recruiter and, they're just box ticking and it's less about demonstrating growth mindset. They're just going, oh, I'm either being rejected because it just looks too short. I'm never having the opportunity to have a conversation, or the person I'm talking to when I first engage in a business isn't at the level I can have a good open business conversation with. What's your view?
Well, so the important thing is people make decisions, processes don't, right? So whether it's a junior recruiter or a senior recruiter, play the person, not some story you have, right? And so knowing that a recruiter's job is to tick a handful of boxes, to put it so bluntly, which is probably disrespectful to recruiters, right? Or screeners specifically. And you don't want to undervalue them because they're not as smart as you as, a chief revenue officer or whatever. Rightfully so, because if they were, they'd probably be in that role instead, right? And knowing that, let's have some empathy for them, right? If they bring forward a bad candidate, who gets the blame? You as the bad candidate or them as the recruiter?
Yeah, 100%
right? Them as the recruiter. So they don't want to look bad. So they're asking you these things because they want to make sure you're not going to make them look foolish, right? And knowing that that's something that needs to happen, you can go out and say, look, I suspect you talk to executives all the time. And if I were in your shoes, I'd make sure I wasn't passing someone over that made you look bad. how do I make sure today that I'm not one of those people? Which is one way of saying, what boxes do you have to tick?
Sure.
Or I might say, thinking back to some of the folks you brought into the organization, what are some of the talk tracks or stories you like to hear where you kind of get into this position where you say, Rich, that was a no-brainer, right? That was a great fit. Like, what are some of those things? What are you looking for in today's call? And what I'm doing is I'm giving you a voice. Like, you are the gatekeeper. I have respect for you. I'm giving you a position. Like, if I were in your shoes, I would probably be worried about this. Is that true? Right? What are some of the things that, my goal today is for you to ultimately feel confident moving me forward, right? How do we make sure we do that? And so I'm still leading the conversation, but I'm getting the information necessary to know what stories to tell. And I'm not disrespecting you through the process. And if knowing, let's say Tolu is your boss, I'm sure he's going to love hearing that. Let's say Tolu was your boss. I was talking to you, Rich. I say, look, I suspect you're in Tolu's ear all the time. What do you think he cares about? When I talk to him next, like, what should I talk about versus what should I avoid? Now I'm selling a vacation that you're going to push me forward to Tolu regardless, right? By saying, like, what does he care about? What does he doesn't? You are the bearer of that information. Coach me. Coach me on how to make you look good is essentially what I'm saying. And then as coaches, we want to see our players be successful. So if I put that recruiter in a position of power over me and respect them, I'm not being subservient to them. I'm leading them to make it their idea. I respect them. They say, okay, Tolu's going to want to hear this and this and this. Don't ask about this. Right? Don't ask about sales. It's going to piss him off. Right? I'm like, wow, thank you for that insight. When I talk to him, I'll share what I learn with you. And now I'm including you in part of the process. Like, we're going to do this thing together and we're collaborating. And it's not me versus you. It's not me trying to impress you. And I might also clarify why I'm on the call. Like, Rich, you get to talk to executives all the time. What specifically about me piqued your interest? Right, and that's going to give me the intel necessary. So those are a couple of tactical tips that you can apply in those situations. But remember, you're working the person. You're not closing the deal. You're not trying to close the deal. You're not trying to be the most important person right now. The only goal you have is to get the next phone call. Like, sales folks will recognize this. You need to get that next call on your calendar. Otherwise, it's a dead deal. Right? You're not waiting around and asking for permission. You're saying, hey, I'll be available to talk to Tolu as soon as, I guess, Tuesday next week. Do you think that works for him? And then you're forced to respond to me there instead of in email where I add friction and we go back and forth and it makes your job harder. My job is to make your life easier.
Yeah, I love it. So let's rewind, because one of the challenges that you'll hear all the time, I certainly hear it, is, we're just not having enough interviews. People are just applying for jobs. They're hitting easy apply. They're telling the story around, oh, it's so competitive in the market today, which is true. But they're going, the sort of evidence that they give you when they tell you this story is there's 1,000 applications for roles, and companies love posting about how they posted a head of sales role and they got 1,400 applicants. It's like this sort of like, feather in a cap. Look how amazing we are. Look at all the people we can attract.
Yeah, sure. Cool.
What's your view on that?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll start with a rhetorical angle here, which is, have you ever hired for your own business before, Rich?
Yeah, I've been a hiring manager for much more of my career than a recruiter.
Okay, so as a hiring manager, let's say you have a need, you need to make a hire, right? Where do you start?
So, well, this is quite interesting because I want to tell you like what I actually do, which I believe is the right thing to go and do versus what most companies do.
Sure. Okay.
So what, I'll give you both answers and you can tell me which one you want to pursue. So what I would do is go through an impact scoping process with whoever's going to go and find that person for me to like truly get clear on. It's almost like doing a discovery of what we really need. What most companies do is they go, right, hey, talent, we need this person. Talent go to the CMS and pull out a JD from 5 years ago. Or they Google it. And I've sat in loads of rooms with people who've just produced to me a Googled, stitched together hodgepodge JD, or now it's ChatGPT. And they just go and produce this brief. So it's like, I need this thing. The inputs are really poor. There's no proper discovery. And then they go and produce this JD.
So I would argue that there's a step before that, but a lot of people do. So they have this challenge And the first thing they go is, do I know anybody that knows how to do this? Right. So the first thing they do is they say, does anybody on my team know somebody? Right. So if I'm the CEO, because again, I'm primarily working with executive leaders, not middle management, right? Where I think middle management is much more process driven, to your point. So at the executive level, it's like, look, who do we know that knows how to solve this? One of the reasons we go that route is there's no recruiting costs. Time to hire is significantly reduced. The likelihood of camaraderie and culture fit being a fit sooner is higher because they've already built those relationships. So they go, who do we know? Okay. Executive leadership team goes around. Oh, I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody. I don't know. The board doesn't know anybody. Oh, great. We're working with a company that doesn't have any connections. Cool. First red flag. Second thing, okay, we got to hire a recruiter, right? Let's do the thing that you said. Like, let's scope it out. Let's go this. Now we're willing to pay up to a 30% finder's fee to get an executive leader in this team. So I'm willing to spend $150, $250, sometimes $500,000 to place somebody. Some of my clients will even spend $1 million to place some of these big time roles, right? So they have no network, so now they have to pay for the privilege. Now, when they struggle at that level, then they go, let's publicly post it on LinkedIn, right? Now, switch hats for a second. I'm a job seeker. Where's the first place I start?
What traditionally, yeah, most people
what's
would go,
what's publicly
control the job boards.
Right. So the first thing we do is we look for the dregs of the dregs with the most competition. And then we get frustrated because these, I'm not saying every company that publishes publicly has dreg positions by any means.
Oh,
But
sure,
I'm
sure.
saying that like it's failed all these other tests and then becomes public. And then that's the ones that we all go to battle over.
Sure.
Right. Whereas then the more astute folks build relationships with the riches of the world, and they build, relationships with talent acquisition and recruiters and headhunters. That's helpful if you have a seat you need to fill. Otherwise, it's kind of annoying. Hey, you got anything for me? You got anything for me? You got anything for me? It starts to get annoying. Now, wouldn't it be better if, as let's say you're doing an account-based marketing strategy as a sales leader, to go, here are my 20 accounts. Here's what the relationships I have within those accounts looks like. And here's how I'm nurturing those relationships over time. Like networking is significantly more impactful, even to the point where jobs that don't exist yet, you have the opportunity to create them. So leaders get to create the value in the roles. Those are significantly more valuable. And then versus a defined role has a pie, a fixed pie in most cases. And it's hard to increase the value or the range or do this. When you create a role, you get to create the pie. And as you build champions in an organization and develop those relationships, you get an opportunity to expand the pie. And what does that mean for the layman or the lay lady? That means more money in your pocket, right? Because you're expanding the opportunity for yourself and you're creating it when nobody else had. It also means there's no competition because the role didn't exist. So you're only competing with yourself. That's a much more powerful position to be in. Now, let's get more tactical with this because I know people are like, well, what do I do about that? Oh, networking sounds great. Right. Well, first of all, the executives that don't have to look for work have developed this discipline and this habit for 20 years. Right. So the best time to start was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Right. So if I'm tracking what I'm doing here, I only have one KPI for clients when they want to get into this tactical job search mode, and that is conversations per week. It's not applications, it's not interviews, it's not offers, it's not any of these other metrics, it's conversations per week. And I want a big number. Like I want you to be so busy that you need to make judgment calls on who you talk to and who you're not, because that's going to improve your clarity. It's going to help focus you. Right. And so you can practice on stronger connections first, practice your narrative, get their feedback, work through people you know. If we get real tactical, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You should spend 2/3 of a conversation about the other person and listening and asking questions to build a reciprocity imbalance so that near the end of that conversation, they'll say, oh shit, this conversation was all about me. How can I help you? Trigger that. And your only goal is to provide more value than you ask in return. So if I'm talking to Rich, how can I best show up for you? What are you looking at? What candidates do you want? How can I open my network for you? Can I make your job easier? Can I eliminate friction? Whatever. And then you go, oh, great. This is great. You've helped me. And ideally, we can show that value immediately. So as an example, if I were introducing you to Tolu and we found out that that would be a good fit for you, I might say, Rich, while I'm on the call, I'm going to text Tolu and three-way call you in, or do a three-way text in. And so while we're still on the phone, your phone beeps. You see Jacob made a valuable exchange of information to you and Tolu. And what that does for me is that helps me stay top of mind, because every time you talk to Tolu, you think of me. Every time I talk to Tolu, I get insight on Rich. So I now have 2 touch points to stay top of mind. And more importantly, now I have your cell phone number. And you open text messages 92% of the time versus emails, which are like 30, right? And it's a little less invasive. So that helps you stay top of mind in a networking context. But most importantly, I'm delivering value, right? So typically when I do a podcast, I actually didn't do this with Tolu, but I have recommended some folks to What Makes You Tick. I give them like 8 or 9 more speakers. So they're so busy, they can't help. Like, shit, we have so much content. Like, I've just eliminated part of their concern of finding new great speakers, and I've pre-vetted them. And now all of those people are a touch point for me to stay top of mind. And so that's what good networking looks like, spending all of your opportunity talking to someone, looking to give them something. And then after you've provided value, they're more likely to provide value back. But we don't want to wait and have someone like Rich say, okay, I'll keep you in mind, because you won't, right? And that's not because you're a bad guy. It's because we're all busy, right? So what I'd rather do is say, are there 2 or 3 other people you could text right now? Like while we're still on the phone, meaning when our hard stop hits, you no longer have to think about me, and you still get to feel good about providing value to me. And if I'm doing the pay it forward piece here, I talked to one person and that one person introduced me to 2 or 3. Now I'm closer to my conversations KPI, right? And as I get busier and busier and busier, naturally your time becomes more scarce. And that scarcity of your time creates more value for you. You're getting more learnings faster. You're hearing about opportunities, or you're creating opportunities faster. To your point, like having more clarity on what you're looking for is important. It is important to know like kind of what the means to the end are, but it's also okay to just have conversations and figure it out as you go, right? It's also easier to do when you already have a job, because your time is already scarce. So the scarcity piece is what drives the value, right? And that's why you can demand more money or more compensation or those things as well. So you can create artificial scarcity just by having a high KPI number, just like your BDRs that are on 20 calls a day, right? And they're like, oh, I could fit you in next week. And like, they're so busy. Then they have to decide, is this really a good fit for us? No. Okay. I'm going to swap that out for someone who is. And it gets better and it gets better, and the pipeline integrity improves. That's what we're doing with our networking as well.
Yeah, I love it. It makes me think of, you triggered like, my brain's like going.
Yeah, I realized I was rambling, so I just stopped.
No. It's absolute gold, and it's just triggering so many things. Because when I'm speaking to executives about this exact problem, they're applying for jobs, they're getting frustrated, pissed off that they're getting junior recruiters screening them, they're stuck in the waiting room, all this nonsense. I literally say, you do know that by the time a job hits LinkedIn, they're so on fire because they've exhausted their network. They've gone out to try and find people themselves. That they've posted on LinkedIn. No one wants to have a job with 1,000 applications. Do you know how long it takes to go through 1,000 applications? And what's the solution to that? Flip an AI in front of it that's going to go and
no, don't do it at all.
Crazy algorim.
Typically,
by the time you get to a good person, because the people who are applying on LinkedIn are applying not just for your job. It's like if you're next to someone who is attractive on Tinder, and you see their phone, they're not chatting to one person, right? They've got like 50 conversations going on. And a lot of people go, oh, I got like this application. And companies' view of this still consistently is, oh, we've got this big pipeline, of candidates. We're really good. And then recruiters are happy because they're going to hit all their sort of KPI metrics around like number of touch points and number of applications and jobs that they go and get. You're feeding this like machine that's designed to be busy. Internal recruiters love to be busy because it gives them value, right? And the worst thing in the world is that they wouldn't have any work, because the first thing that happens when a company's not recruiting is that the recruiters get riffed, right?
So marketers, but yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly, right, exactly. All these things. Yeah, let's cut off marketing. That's a great idea. So I told people about this, and then I talked to them about the best thing you can possibly do is get a set of 20 accounts, and I call it the Dream 20. of companies that you would love to work in, full of the challenges that you love to solve. And I think one of the sort of the pieces of conflict in people's minds that would be great for us to talk about is how they position that conversation, because they're going, well, I am looking for a role. And what most people do when they have tried before to DM and outreach into a set account is they go, hey, I'm a VP sales or VP marketing. I worked at this company. Here are three great things about me. Here's my resume. And I'm like, imagine if you're a salesperson and you reached out to an account and went, hey,
People do that all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Most people do it, right? Here's three great things about our solution. Here's my Calendly. I'm like, no one's booking a Calendly call in your thing. So why would people think it's different from a job search?
One side on that, whenever you click on their Calendly, every day is wide open. And you're like, clearly not very valuable if there's no scarcity there either. By the way, at least put some artificial blocks in your Calendly, people.
Yeah, exactly. So if we want to create scarcity, but we also just want to actually have enough pipeline that we're not in that scarcity mindset where we are literally going like, oh shit, we've only got 2 opportunities. Like we need one to land. I'm worried about paying my mortgage. I've got my kids at university. My wife's giving me jip. My husband's giving me jip, whatever that looks like. So when you're coaching executives to do that outreach piece and start to build this roster, what's the ways that you recommend that they can approach that conversation?
The first thing is you have to think about the value you can provide to the other person. There is a very empathetic, not me first approach. And you have to genuinely think, what is this person interested in? And the beautiful thing about LinkedIn is that we typically see what everyone's interested in quite a bit. Granted, LinkedIn does tend to hit certain industries harder. For example, SaaS, right? There's a lot of SaaS people and a lot of sales and revenue people on LinkedIn. So it tends to serve that audience better. And so if we have listeners that are in healthcare, for example, none of this advice applies to them, right? Like you might have to go to symposiums and listen to, a top scientist give a speech at Stanford, then go up and say, this is what I thought about your speech. Here's some other things that I think could make, new talking points for you in the future. Are you open to coffee? Right. So it might need to be in person. Now, LinkedIn is sort of stripped a lot of that complexity out and made it really lazy. Right. But if instead I came to Rich and I said, Rich, I saw that you lead this podcast. I have somebody that you need to talk to. And I provide Chris Doe to you as an example, who I have talked to a couple times, but I'm not on that relationship basis with him. But just for sake of discussion, I bring you somebody with 500,000 followers. And out of the blue, you're like, holy shit, I got to talk to this guy. Like you've created the contact. So you have to find something of value. Now, what worked, and I kind of got to cheat this way, is that I was a contributor for Forbes and a ghostwriter for New York Times and some big publications in my early 20s. And I promise you, every outreach I did got follow back because I just said, hey, I'm working on an article for Forbes. Are you open to chat? It was like one sentence. And everyone's like, yes, I would like to be interviewed for Forbes. Thank you very much. Like it wasn't like you have to pay for it or any of that bullshit that you see all the time with PR stuff. Yeah. It's like, I'm trying to bring you value. All right. Now, I strategically chose to interview a lot of CMOs because my career was about marketing. And so I learned more from CMOs and I established a network very early. But it was because I had something of value for them to give. Now, a lot of people struggle with this because they're like, oh, I don't know what value I have to provide. Well, no wonder you're not getting hired. First of all, you don't know your value in the market. That might be something that you need to do some soul searching on and figure, look back at your career, do some self-awareness. Where have I made the most impact? What has brought me the most joy? And do some clarity work there. For executives, they claim they know their value very well, but then they don't know how to pitch it. And then I always find it interesting because I work with a lot of sales folks, as so do you. Sales folks are supposed to be the strongest negotiators, and they have the most volatile contracts in the entire company. And they're supposed to be great at selling, but can't interview for shit. And those are all sales techniques, right? So I find that interesting. But back to providing value, sometimes it's commenting on a post every 2 or 3 days, just paying attention and following. If I were to have 20 marquee companies, let's say Google's one of them, and I wanted to be in enterprise selling there in the AI division because it's hot and it looks sexy and so on. I will go and find some people in the org chart and I will follow them on LinkedIn and we'll see which ones are publishing content. And I will comment on it for about 6 weeks. And then when I see what they're interested in, those types of things, then I'm going to reach out to one of them and say, hey, I saw this post you did a couple weeks ago. It reminded me of this. And I'll make a connection for them, or I'll give them some content to read, or I'll welcome a conversation, or like there's an in there somewhere. But you have to get to know somebody before just like going door to door and selling religion, right? Like it just obviously isn't going to work like that. And how dare you have the audacity to say you're a sales leader if that's your approach? Like, let's think about it a little bit more deeply. And the problem is, you can't really blame people because you go read content out there and all the content saying, we'll just send a DM and send this and send this. And again, most of the content is designed for the messy middle. And when you ask AI to do it, it's designed for the messy middle too, because that's what AI sees. I watched this video the other day on YouTube about asking ChatGPT to paint a digital illustration of a glass full of wine. Have you ever seen that? So the prompt is like, show me a glass of wine filled to the brim. And it spits back an image and the glass is half full, right? Because that's how people drink wine, right? They usually don't, unless they're absolute masochists, right? Like fill it to the top. And so the guy's like frustrated. He's like, no, I want a glass filled to the top, right to the brim, like getting really descriptive, halfway. And he's like, okay, I want it overflowing, spilling out everywhere. It'll show a glass of wine half full with wine spilling out the sides where it was full. And people are like, why can't AI do this? Well, AI can't see a glass full of wine as it studies all of the internet because nobody pours a glass full of wine like that. So it can't learn like that. Now, what's funny is if you do prompts like this, you say, I want to write for an executive audience. What AI does is it spits back bullshit and buzzwords because no executive knows how to speak clearly. And so everything you get is bullshit. So actually, as I'm even training GPTs and Claude and Gemini and all these different things that I'm doing, I have to tell it, okay, now you've given me the executive bullshit. Now let's make the language accessible. Right? Let's not lose meaning. Let's make it accessible. What language would we use here? And that helps to get to a clear description. And so what you're realizing is if you take most content at face value, you're going to lose. You're going to navigate yourself to mediocrity. If you only listen, like you're in an influence chamber, an echo chamber, or you're only hearing the same stuff over and over and over again, you're going to drive yourself crazy. You need perspective. And as leaders, that should come naturally to you to push beyond what you're seeing and think differently. Right? So you have to push beyond that messy middle. And you have to find the folks that really stand out. And oftentimes they are people that have YouTube channels with 1.5 million followers or something, where something is truly different and unique about them, where they go, wow, Mr. Beast changed the internet. Right? And, Marquise Brownlee, like, changed reviews. Like, look how they do it so differently and so engaging. Like, there's something different. They trudge their own path. And by the time you copy someone else's strategy, you're way behind. And of course, you're going to lose. So it's weird. Like, basically, whatever AI tells you, do the exact opposite. Like, if it says talk like a robot, talk like a human. Yeah. It'll stand out. If it says, like, oh, like, make this shitty situation sound like you're weaving gold, then instead, just be honest about it and authentic. That's how you stand out.
Yeah, I love it. It's just showing people how you'll be in the role, right? Like fundamentally, if you can outreach to someone and you have got a very clear ICP, you understand their problem statements. They're not big, massive problems that you can solve, that they would attach a huge amount of money to go and solve the problem, i.e. buy a product that fixes it, which you are the product. And then you've actually got this ABM approach of valuable things that you can offer them. I really like the idea of thinking about the relationships you could introduce because, you're always one person away from solving a problem. So that's a really good way of doing it. I often talk to people about just simply writing a good LinkedIn article about the top 5 challenges you helped solve in your previous business that's totally would resonate with your ICP. To the top three mistakes we made scaling from 10 to 25 million ARR. Oh, by the way, hey, I know you're a 10 million pound business. I just we just faced this same growth period. We made some really big mistakes along the way. I wrote an article. Would you like me to send you it? What I encourage people to do is never to send the article, but you're looking for indicators of interest
first.
rather than commitment. And I was just wondering, like, let's say that someone has built a bit of an ABM pack of valuable things that they know that company would appreciate because they're like growth stage specific, they're industry specific, they're relevant. How are you packaging that when you're reaching out to people?
So the way I remember this, and I repeat to clients, is that you need to be a well of information, not a fire hose. So you're not just spraying it out right away. You actually need to have a provocative hook in a lot of ways. And so I'll apply this in an interview context, for example. So one thing that happens often is you're going through an interview process and then suddenly everything slows down. And as a candidate, you're like, ooh, did I say something wrong? Like, when do I reach out? How many days do I wait? That's the question I get all the time. When do I wait? Do I do it Friday? Do I do it Tuesday? Like, when is the highest response? Like, they're like overanalyzing the situation where it's like, dude, it's the weekend. Like, they're just hanging out, like, relax, right? Or whatever. Now, people are always wondering, how do I rekindle this deal? And it's about providing value and not asking in that moment. And so we don't provide all the value in a thank you email that says, oh, thank you for the interview today. It was really great. It looks like we're aligned. And guess what? These are the last 3 things that I did, which is, by the way, every thank you email template you've ever seen, which is, I created growth from 0 to 50 million at so-and-so, and we had a 37%, whatever. And then you don't even read those because you know where it's going. Instead, you write a thank you email such as, hey, appreciated the time today. I'm looking forward to talking to Tolu. I'll let you know what we learn. I'll get back to you. Super tight. And then a couple days later, you follow up and you say something like, had a great talk with Tolu, have some ideas for you. Open next week. That's it. So I'm saying, I have some ideas for you. What ideas? I guess I'm going to have to call you to find out.
Yeah.
Right? So we're saying like, hey, I saw your post about failing at 10 million. I actually had that recently and was thinking about writing an article about it. Open to talk. Like, I'm not giving you any details. I also experienced that. We have some shared identity here, right? Which is an influence trigger. And so if people want to know a little bit more about how to do this at a fundamental level, I would recommend reading Influence by Robert Cialdini and understanding all of the triggers of social proof, of reciprocity, of authority and or false authority, and why we behave the way that we do. And then applying that in your job search context, right? And so we're providing some value to make somebody's life easier, which is triggering reciprocity and earning phone calls to then trigger some other elements of persuasion later. And again, I keep sharing this is likely for sales folks. Sales folks should know this. This should be baked into their DNA. So you get a double whammy of being better at interviewing and better at sales when you read Influence. Marketers as well. Like when marketers design landing pages, they often trigger like 5 to 7 influence pieces, all the way from scarcity, third-party validation, authority. The third-party validation is from having, as seen on Forbes and Inc. and this. And then also, hey, here was a CEO who also liked this and gave a recommendation. Like, so there's triggering that. And then here's the headline, which is the hook that drives the eye. And like, it's all perfectly designed psychologically for a reason. So a lot of these things I think we do intuitively, but if you want to brush up on some of those skills, definitely it's like a 700 or 800 page book and you need a highlighter, but it's very, very valuable.
Yeah, exactly. I think the other thing is that it's like breaking things down into really small chunks. I can't remember who said it, but someone told me a long time ago how marketers and salespeople think differently. And salespeople go like, here's the pitch deck. They build this like long thing with everything that's great about the solution and great about the products and great about the benefits. Whereas marketers would go, over the next 10 days, we're going to break down these ideas into really small digestible chunks. So you're hitting people multiple. Exactly. Because you're hitting people because fundamentally most people ignore most of your marketing most of the time. You talked about in the previous podcast that you did with Tolu around how just like consistently repeats things, bam, 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 which annoys the hell out of people, but he's making sure that he's sticking stuff in that brain because he knows that most people forget most of the stuff that you're going to say. So a lot of the time what I see people doing in an effort to be proactive is like create a website, like a landing page. Here's like my resume. Here's like, 5 case studies that I've written. They go like so overload. And if you think
Yeah, it's
about
not
that
necessary.
it's like crazy, but think about it from a founder's perspective. Imagine if like someone sent you that, you're like, oh my goodness me, if I worked with this person, they would send me like this, like you say, a fire hydrant of information, throwing the kitchen sink at me and expect me to digest it. And
Yeah,
these people are busy. You've got to like, bam, get into their brain. I'm just wondering what that's triggering in your brain when we're talking about that.
Yeah, you need. I say this often. It's not what you know; it's who you know. Right? That's the easiest thing. Like if I reached out to you cold, my likelihood of a response is pretty low, even when providing value. But if Tolu says, "Rich, Jacob's a real deal," that's all he says. You're like, "Great, I'll take the call." Done. Like you need to influence the people that influence them. That's it. That's the easiest path. So that comes down to relationships, networking, and psychology, not tactics and resumes and historical documents. And even the way that resume and LinkedIn, from a standpoint, is a historical recollection of your past, but it doesn't point to your future. So where, and this is another concept we can get into, I think that executive leaders that rely on inbound attention are foolish. It's great if you're getting inbound attention, fine, right? But you don't get to choose your path when it's inbound. When you do outbound, you choose your strategy, right? Now, instead of like trying to perfectly optimize everything and pick up serendipity that the timing is right with Google that's going to look at your profile. No, it's not. It's not going to happen like that. Instead of trying to optimize everything, wouldn't it be just better if you picked up the damn phone and talked to somebody about it and then got closer? Even if you're not making leaps and bounds closer, that's why the conversation KPI is important. Like you shouldn't be focused on an inbound strategy if on the same hand, you want to take control of your career. So much of our careers are guided by other people, not by ourselves. An example of this, I started as like a graphic designer technically, but the role evolved to marketing assistant right away and then marketing manager. And I was working on HubSpot and doing RevOps and sales stuff. So I had HubSpot on my LinkedIn. So therefore somebody hired me as a marketing manager again. And then because I was a marketing manager that led 5 people, I got an opportunity to be a director at one point. And then because I was a director of marketing, I couldn't go back and go from making $150,000 a year to 30. So I pursued VP of marketing positions, and other people were like, yeah, I liked working with Jacob. So they pulled me. It's like my whole career was dictated by someone else. I never wanted to be a marketer. Like I actually don't even like marketing, especially in most cases, right? I do like helping people market themselves and tell narratives and stories. And that's where I found meaning and purpose in what I do. But like you start early, you graduate college, you get your first job and you're a BDR because a BDR is a great entry point into business. Fast forward 20 years, you're a CRO and you're like, man, I hate sales. How did that happen? You never took control. But when you put yourself out there, I'm a director of sales, recruiters come and say, I'm looking for a director of sales. The opportunities that come to you are more of the same. You never took control. So if you want to change your career and you want to change your path and change your life, you have to go outbound with your approach. You have to network more. You have to say, look, Rich, this might sound crazy. I've been a director of sales my entire career. I'm not really sure I like sales. Have you seen anyone make a transition into marketing? Or have you seen somebody transition into operations from sales? Have you seen people do this? And you go, no, I haven't. I think you're stupid. Great. Move on to the next, right? Have that conversation 100 times. And someone's going to say, yeah, I do know somebody that did that. Let me connect you with them. Then you have that conversation. They say, this is exactly what I did. And it was a pain in the ass. Here's what you have to do. And you might have to take 100 shots in your pipeline to find that one little bit of insight. And that's the habit that we establish. If we want to make the change, we have to start talking about it now. We don't say, oh, I'll get one more sales deal under my belt and I'll have saved enough money to have leverage. No, you have to start the narrative now with the direction that you're heading. And I know this probably better than most because I've had 6 businesses in the last 10 years. And one was a marketing agency. One was a career agent for executives business. One was a community. One, like I had all these different business models and I've reinvented myself every few years. And I've found I've typically been failing upward. But I started as I was a journalist in high school and the AV kid. that became marketing, that turned into sales, that turned into founder, that turned into agency sales, that turned into like, I've reinvented myself like 10 times and have had multiple 7-figure businesses now. This might, Dan Priestley would probably like this, although he's significantly more successful than I am, right? But he's had to reinvent businesses and reinvent himself multiple times. Like that is, I think, more of the definition of leadership than waiting for inbound attention and trying to like, how do I put some more sequins on my dress to be more attractive, right? Like maybe the right person will see me if I do it like this, right? And it's just, I think it's a trap. And most of the content out there would perpetuate that trap.
I agree. I think it's quite a founder mindset. It's quite an entrepreneurial mindset. Entrepreneurs always have to reinvent themselves. Interestingly, I created a job for myself after leaving a business through 12 years through redundancy. And not by the end of it, by the way, I was going, I don't really love this anymore, but I've been doing it and I've become successful. And you take the next step, right? But I was burned out and I wasn't in love with what I did. I had met this incredible entrepreneur called Steve Bolton, who actually mentored Dan Priestley. And I just remember the impact that he made on my life. We went to see a Jay Abraham event in London, and Steve had got Jay, like he'd become friends with him, and he got him to do this like mastermind session with 20 local businesses. Jay Abraham charges 50 grand for a day. And these businesses would pay like, $3,000 to spend 15 minutes with Jay Abraham at the front of this event and like learn about their business. And he had like late rooms and all these like wonderful e-commerce brands and local businesses. And I was just sat there going, this is amazing. But I was so like entrepreneurial at that time, working in the business, just getting my directorship, just getting my shares, that golden handshake, that I kind of let that relationship just kind of like peter away. We stayed in like very loose contact, but nothing meaningful. So when I left that business through redundancy, I was like, oh my goodness me, I need to work with that guy. So I sent him a Facebook message saying, Steve, it's my dream to work with you and one day start a business. And then the next day we met for lunch. The next day I was up at his marketing agency in London as he was creating an angel investment fund. And he said, look, I don't have a role for you, but we've got this business problem, which was we can't really find the right people. Our CEO is spending half her time dealing with staff issues. We're not creating more leaders. We're having to buy them in. And I was like, that's literally what I've done for 12 years. Here's my 3-step process of how I would do that. He created a role. We've then got on a 5-year journey together to start this business. And then I took it over last year myself. So I've created a role inside a business. And Steve is someone who has reinvented himself like 5 times during his career. This angel investment fund that he's now got, and he's investing into these wicked tech businesses. It's only like a last sort of 3-4 years thing. Before that, he was in property. Before that, he was doing like, like go ape rope swing, like forest activities. All entrepreneurs think that way. So I think if you're speaking to the right person, they'll understand that and they will find that attractive. Because if you've been successful in multiple ways, building your identity around different things, and you've managed to sort of like get some traction, that says a lot more to me than someone who's, like you say, just gone through that standard career step and ladder all the way through, but kind of like reached a bit of a ceiling that you would expect after 20, 30 years they should have broken past. And I just wonder what that makes you think of.
I think a lot of times the ceiling is self-imposed because we're comparing ourselves to others that are doing it and realizing that that's as high as it gets, right? And I think that if you're around long enough, a lot of folks dream like, oh, I can't wait to be in the C-suite. I'll be the boss, right? And then they realize, oh, the CEO is the boss. Then they become the CEO, and then they realize the investors are the boss. Then they become the investors and realize that the government's the boss, right? Then they get into government and realize the people that pay the government is the boss, right? So it's like you're always under someone else's boot, no matter how high you go. And it's just that most people pitter out at a specific spot. And it's easier for me to take a very assertive and authoritarian type approach with my clients because they are the ones that have the audacity to call themselves leaders. So if you call yourself a leader, then entrepreneurship, it should be pretty natural because you're leading through a lot of uncertainty. Sometimes you need to reinvent yourself. Whether it's yourself and your personal brand or a company's product and changing the go-to-market motion or pivoting, which is the word we often use. But we had to pivot. Great. You're being entrepreneurial, right? In doing that, because you're listening to the next audience and what their demands are, and you're changing to make that happen. Like, it's not different than what you have to do for your career. So I found that the fastest way to get people to the aha moment is to just apply what they know in their expertise to themselves. And it works for product leaders, the same as it works for sales leaders, the same as it works for marketing leaders, the same as it works for design leaders, the same, like you apply your business acumen to yourself and things start to unlock, right? Because like a product leader knows, oh, we got to do a product development roadmap, right? A marketer goes, I need to do an ABM campaign. A sales leader says, I need to develop the ICP, which is all the same shit, right? Similarly done, different terminology for it. And then as a job seeker, I need to pick my, top 20 or dream 20 or whatever it is you called it, right? Not all that different. Now, all of a sudden, if you know the process, then you can start to see it play out. And then a lot of these folks, they're the ones that go into a company and say, hey, we should have been doing this for a long time. Exactly. You need to be doing it for yourself as well. And it can be overwhelming, especially when you're in a job that's expecting 60 to 80 hours a week. You're juggling kids. You have I'm not suggesting that it's easy. I'm suggesting that you throttle up or throttle down your KPI, depending on what you're going through. So if your conversations KPI when you're unemployed is 50 a week or 30 a week or 10 a week, and you have a position, just throttle it down to 2. Take 2 calls to keep moving forward. The onus is always on you to have your own personal CRM and manage follow-ups and do that. Those are the people that you see winning time and time again. And they're the ones that are also thinking, you know what? That thing I just saw, I think Rich would like that. And sometimes they don't even remember your name. Like, who's that guy on that podcast I did last year? Oh, I got to find that. He would totally like that. Him and his partner would like that. Let me get that over to them. And as soon as that thought crosses your mind, you have to move to take action. That's the habit you have to train. A bias for action in doing that. If you don't have that, you're going to find yourself behind the 8 ball more likely than not. And then you lose leverage, you lose money, and then you retire later and you're sad. Or something like that. It's the opposite of do this, then that, then profit. I call it a meat grinder. It just continues kicking your ass while you tumble out of, the lifestyle that you would hope to lead for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I think that reframe around thinking about how you've pivoted inside the jobs that you've had, because everyone's had to do that, with their teams and get buy-in from above. But also, if you do know founders and entrepreneurs, guarantee they've had to go and do it. So to get that answer to the question around how can I pivot, I've reflected, I've got this 20-year career doing a thing. They've become like gray threads, not red threads for me. They drain me. They don't give me strength. I can't even imagine the idea of having to go through another job search to get that position in the hope that one day we might sell the company and I might make enough money to not have to work again, which is like a lot of the dream that people get into. It's like, how can I create opportunities that fill me with love and joy and fulfillment and growth and challenge and all the things that people want? And I think that we've talked a bit about being entrepreneurial. And I believe that a lot of people who are listening to this maybe haven't had a business, maybe dream of having a business one day, but they're all intrapreneurial. They're building within a business, and founders need these people. And I think there's 4 types of people that a startup particularly can hire, but I think it works for most businesses, which is you can have adders, subtractors, dividers, and multipliers. And this language makes sense for people because you're going, well, there's only 2 of those that grow. If it looks like a mathematical equation, adders and multipliers will grow my business. Subtractors and dividers will shrink it in different ways. And no one wants to hire an adder leader. So if you are one of these worker bees, you're someone who has done a good job in their business, but never really pushed forward. They're probably going to think, and particularly if you approach your job search in the same way that everyone else does, you're an adder. Some people are just subtractors. They're the wrong people in the wrong businesses with the wrong capability. You should get them out. Dividers are people who are often high skill, high will. They are very talented, but they're not aligned. That alignment piece that you mentioned is not there. They're not bad people. Maybe the expectations are being completely mismanaged. Maybe they're just burned out. Maybe they're doing something they don't love, but they're going to pull the business away from where it's going. But if a founder can find a multiplier, I call them the entrepreneurs. They act like founders in the business. They multiply everyone's impact. They take you to places that you could never have dreamed. They're the who knows the how. And what I think is that I would really love to get your perspective on, if we think about the founder's perspective for a minute, this is a person who's gone all in on their dream. They're trying to create a business.
This is pretty easy for me since I'm doing that right now.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So imagine myself. I will say also, and I've talked to other founders and CEOs about this. The one piece of caution I'd have about this framework is that you actually don't want too many multipliers. which probably sounds counterintuitive. And the reason being, multipliers are kind of a pain in the ass. Like the things will often get out of hand too quickly and you lose control. And to a degree, you want to lose control, right? But there are places for adders. Like there are places in businesses for consistency. You need that consistency to forecast. If you have 5 multipliers, you're going to blow the business apart. It's too much horsepower, right? Depending on the size, right? So you might want a handful of team leads that are multipliers. Great. And particularly in high growth companies, you want that. But when you start to get into political organizations like a Microsoft or a Google, you don't want that many multipliers. In fact, multipliers will be punished and kept in their place and held back in certain ways, and gaslit into staying put, versus in a startup environment, they tend to be able to run free. So I think that's something to be mindful of. There's a time and a place for it, and you can't have too many. Some might also misconstrue a multiplier with a disruptor, because in order to multiply, oftentimes you do need to disrupt. You need to tear down systems, rebuild them so that they can scale, and those types of things. So too much disruption and too much change will remove the consistency of the adders and freak them out. And you can change the whole dynamic in the wrong way. And you can almost self-prophesize your failure in that. So I actually don't want too many multipliers, at least at my stage, right? So kind of my 2 cents there. Yeah, and I've had companies that have shared, like, it is a pain in the ass to lead people like that. One point I have noticed, particularly with some of the executives, and this tends to be more true in CRO roles and in CMO roles. So it tends to be more true here. So have that grain of salt. When I'm talking to a CRO who's about to get put into a $70 or $80 million company, that conversation is not about hiring the CRO specifically. It's hiring the CRO and 5 to 10 more people with that hire. So it's not just I'm hiring, Rich, the CRO. I'm hiring Rich, his VP of sales, his VP of customer success, his VP of marketing, if marketing reports into revenue in this stack, his relationships here, his top AEs. And so the companies that are making the big plays aren't hiring one person, they're hiring 10. And I've even heard that the more appealing the position, the more a CEO will lean into, okay, so when you leave your position, who's coming with you? And if you can't answer that question, they're not going to hire you. So it's not just about advocating for yourself, but about the entire team. And so that, to your multiplier point, if somebody's hiring a multiplier, they're probably not just hiring one. And ultimately, you're going to want to bring that coalition of support either. If we're thinking Game of Thrones and political style, it's nice to have 10 people that got your back right when you go into a new company, right? You need that groundswell of support. And then also, like, I've had clients when we've orchestrated succession plans where one VP will lead to go to a Fortune 500, and then month by month, the other team gets stripped apart and leaves and follows them, right? So like I'm thinking of one instance, but I can't name the name or I'll probably get sued. But I'm thinking of one instance where an entire department of about 8 like high net worth people on this high performing team all moved to a different industry together, as the one leader multiplied that opportunity and brought all of them with them along. So they brought their entire posse, and that's what people are hiring. And ultimately that cost that company probably $30 million a year to bring that whole team over. And it was no sweat for them at that stage. I don't know if I answered your question or I just talked a little bit about how I'm thinking about it.
No,
But
you absolutely did. And if I think about the best executives I have ever worked with, a lot of whom have been on the podcast, they always talk about the teams they brought with them, because people follow great leaders, right? Because it is a hard thing to find a really good leader who like fully trusts you and gives the autonomy and freedom and all the things that you want. And you're right, multipliers want freedom. They're entrepreneurs. So you can't shackle these people. So founders need to realize that if you are going to hire a multiplier, you can't hire them and tell them what to do. It's like the whole you're hiring smart people to tell you what to do thing. Like, I've got a problem. This is a gap. It's a blind spot for me. And if you can come in and find the blind spots that founders have, and there's a big enough problem that that's actually causing them some significant problems and challenge, then you can be that multiplier for them and they'll love you for it. And it also really helps you to understand, if you're qualifying an opportunity, if they don't value that, would you be happy? So if you are someone that really does want freedom, you want to like choose the projects you work on and like break systems because you have got a better way. You know that you can bring people around that. You're not just being disruptive, my way or the highway. It's like, this is going to help all of us be better. If in the process, or that founder is very, very negative towards that view, they probably just want an adder. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some businesses
Right.
need adders,
Now,
right?
I want to go back to a point because we wanted this podcast to be very tactical for listeners. Like, how do we make sure that happens? Right. And so, where, and I'll call out a lot of career coaches out there, a lot of content out there says, fix your elevator pitch, practice your stories, tell better this, tell better that. That's all bullshit. Like, there is a reason why those things can be valuable in passing, like in due time. But if you want to make an impressive impact, you build the right impression right away, ask better questions. Don't practice better stories, ask better questions. You can tell someone who's the real deal by the quality of question they ask, not by how perfect their answer is. And since we can't predict what somebody's going to ask of us, it's much stronger for us to prepare by asking deeper and deeper questions. If we can preemptively answer that, great. Now we're getting deeper into the conversation. So, tactical hat on again. If there's a frame of mind I can put listeners in on this call, it's as you go into an interview process, remove yourself as the solution, consider yourself a consultant, and you've already got the job. And ask questions to make sure you're the right fit instead. And that looks something like, can you help me understand why you wouldn't make a less expensive hire here? Have you thought about promoting someone internally? What's stopping you from going to the board and grabbing someone from their network? I'm talking through all of their alternatives to see what is your reasoning for picking me. And if I've done a good job of clarifying why I'm there in the first place and what got them excited, then I can lean into that story more. Oh, it makes sense why you're talking to me because I think differently than that. Right? I think a lot of CROs in this position would do X, Y, and Z, which sounds like something you've tried before. Right? So, in order to know how to tell better stories, ask better questions. Ask them, what are your alternatives? But don't share yours. Right? You can drip some. Yeah, I was talking to a CEO just the other day. Increases your value because other people want to talk to you. That's that third-party validation. You're exploring their alternatives with it, which if anyone here knows about negotiation having the best alternative to the negotiated agreement, having more options creates leverage, creates power. And when you're saying, hey, what are all your options? And they're saying, I don't have that option. I don't want to do that one. I don't want to do that. They're eliminating their options and you're improving yours because you're getting the insight that you need. So if you want to beat other executives in a hiring process, ask better questions. Don't simply prepare perfect answers for all the shit that you've done in the past, even though that's what most LinkedIn advice and most career coaching advice would tell you. Yes, it's important to know how to do that, but it's more important to just work through it and know how to tell the truth, even if it's difficult. If you've never practiced a story before, simply narrate that and say, Rich, I've never been asked that before. So to be honest, you caught me a little off guard. But the good thing is, well, I'm not a great interviewer. This is where my focus is, right? But let me do my best here, right? And you're like, wow, this is more engaging. He's trying to be genuine, right? And so we can set the stage with that and get right up front. A lot of people will have not interviewed for 10 years. Oh, I'm so rusty. Like, that's a bad thing. Like, the ones that are perfect at interviewing are the ones that I got to look out for because they have to do it all the time. There's a reason they're getting passed up on. But if I get to say, Rich, I haven't been interviewed in like 10 years, so bear with me because I'm going to be rusty. I get to remove this insecurity that I'm a bad interviewer and get it front and center. And then I just get to have a natural conversation. And if you pretend you already have the job and you're a consultant, I'm not worried about, do I impress you? I already have the job. So if I'm trying to help you make the best decision here, that's where I'm educating and consulting and I'm showing you what it's like to work with me. Now, if an interview starts going the wrong path and someone's like, I have 10 questions to ask you, I might stop and try to reframe and reposition that agenda right there. You might say like, I'm sure we're going to get to all these questions, but as I've hired other executive leaders before, I've found that the most engaging conversations that I've had have been ones where we almost treat it more like a brainstorming and a consult session versus an interview. Are you open to proceeding like that? And I try to reframe to a position where I'm going to be more powerful and have a stronger presence. Because if I'm talking through, and most of my clients are like this, if they're talking about solving future problems, they're in their sweet spot. They get to show their strength. They get to show their leadership presence. They get to ask the right questions. They come across as more assertive, all the traits you look for in a multiplier. But if you're waiting and you're on the back foot, like, what's Rich going to ask me next? Hey, why were you only at that company for 8.5 months? And I have to go like, well, it actually was pretty good. And we had some good results and we actually tripled pipeline, but it kind of wasn't a good fit because of that, and then like, you're just losing and you're on the back foot. It destroys your confidence. You lose that deal immediately. Like, so you need to either understand how to frame the truth and be honest and frame it in a way that's engaging, or avoid it altogether and just keep the conversation moving forward and solving problems. If you're the one that's consistently driving value and solving problems, and that's how you run the interview process, eventually you're going to say, well, if you want to keep getting advice from me, maybe you should pay me. But they should get so accustomed to getting support from you and value from you and working with you and seeing themselves working with you over time that they can't think about other options. That's where your leverage is the highest. And that's where it's easier as the sunk cost picks up of committing to you. It's easier for them to give Jacob another $100,000 outside of budget than to think about going back to the process again.
One thing I would hate to finish this podcast without talking about is what you spoke about at the very start of the chat, which is around how you've got this thing that's going completely viral right now and breaking all of your Zapier links.
Yeah, it's not supposed to. Yeah,
So,
thanks.
I know it might be in beta mode, but could you give us a bit of a sneak peek around what you are doing to help people?
I have a very contrarian perspective on what you should do on LinkedIn. And it would actually be very interesting to get your take on it from a recruiter's perspective, because I tend to think that people that share too much on LinkedIn negotiate against themselves. Like, for example, like, I grew a business to 50 million, but they want to run $200 million businesses. They don't really get the opportunity because they undersell themselves. So it'd almost be better to dumb that language down and save it for a resume than publicize it. And so it's very contrarian to what most LinkedIn writers would say. And then as I've done testing through LinkedIn Recruiter and what actually optimizes profiles and gets them to rank, like, what you say under the actual titles doesn't really mean much. The titles themselves and the companies do, which you can't necessarily change. So rather than having like 2,000 characters in this section and 2,000 here and just this big long profile, like, we developed an optimizer that really trims it down to its core. And then from there, it's really getting people more self-aware about how to position themselves. And so we created this tool. It actually cost me a little bit of money to run every time, but we're giving it away for free as we're testing it. And we don't really have any intentions on charging for it. Unless spam becomes an issue, then we might have to put $1 on it, right? Like, pay $1 and then you can get it. But we trained this tool for like 3 or 4 months, and it's at freelinkedinreview.com, and it's in beta, and we're testing it. And we're getting 100 requests an hour right now. So my American Express is getting blown up. But I'm hoping that people find some value in it. We've gotten some good feedback from it. And then we plan to hard launch that in a couple weeks as we work out some of the kinks. And then the other piece of value I like to give folks is we have a YouTube channel now at Execs and the City. And we have a newsletter where I write like 2,000 to 4,000 word pieces every week, really meaty, like contrarian pieces. And that's at execsandthecity.com, which is a play on Sex in the City. So there's a little bit of a corporate play on words there.
Yeah, amazing. Cool. I'll put some links in the comments. But Jacob, as always, it's been an absolute pleasure. Let's maybe jump back on and talk about this from a company's perspective and how they can become more attractive, if you're up for it.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm up for it.
Legend. Thank you so much, my friend. Everyone else, I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this conversation, we've got a newsletter called Growth Magnet on LinkedIn, where we take the best insights from all of these episodes and turn them into bite-sized format for you to enjoy.